Members, please take a seat. And I'll call upon the Chief Executive to first address the Council. President Andrew Lam, members of the Council, good morning. In another 3 weeks, I will have completed my 5-year term as the Chief Executive. Today, with the arrangement of the President, I am here at this chamber to speak for the last time and to answer members' questions. I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Here, I would like to thank President Lam in advance that on the 21st of June, he's arranged a farewell lunch for me. Now, usually at this moment, people would like to take a retrospective look of the past and to look ahead. Now, for me, in the past 5 years, it's full of turbulence. Hong Kong has faced unprecedented challenges. So there are many issues that we would like to take a look at. This year is also the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to the motherland. Now we are now back to the one country, two systems principle and the right track, so we are at a new starting point. That's why everyone in Hong Kong has great expectations for our future. Today, I would like to share with you my views on 3 aspects. 1, executive-legislature relations. 2, patriots administering Hong Kong and how we could ensure good governance in Hong Kong. 3, of course, the future of Hong Kong. The SAR as Chief Executive-led system. The Chief Executive is directly accountable to the Central People's Government. The Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR has a dual accountability role. It's a dual head system. The Chief Executive is accountable to the Hong Kong SAR as well as to the Central People's Government. The Chief Executive is the head of the executive, and the Chief Executive is also the head of the entire Special Administrative Region. So the Chief Executive has to make sure that the executive that she leads is doing its job, is doing its best, and is managing SAR affairs properly. At the same time, the Chief Executive has the duty to ensure that the executive and the legislature system works well. And of course, the Chief Executive also has to ensure the judiciary can exercise its powers independently. On the 5th of July 2017, I came to this council as the Chief Executive for the first time, and I took a look back at what I did in the past, in the previous 3 decades as a civil servant, and at the time I said this. I said that I'm not trying to please anybody, but I said at the time that I love coming to this council because this is where members do real work for the good of the people. And in 2017, as you know, at the time, a few years before 2017, and also we went through the 2016 Legislative Council elections, you knew exactly what the council was like at the time. I saw that we had a few years of bickering and infighting, and I was rather sad about that. I heard my civil servant colleagues say this, they ask sometimes, how much time they would have to spend, how many hours they have to spend before they could enter the chamber on their own agenda item because there was non-stop filibustering. And I was really sad to see that. At the time, I saw that executive legislative relations were not good, and there was lack of mutual trust, and that's delayed the pace of government implementing policies. I was worried, but then I was not desperate. I believe because most members of this council, most officials loved Hong Kong, and they were prepared to find a way out of that plight for the good of Hong Kong. In the next 2 years, I worked very hard. I set up communication with members from different political parties and affiliations. And I also took on board many of their views. And that's why for the 2017 policy address and the 2018 policy address, there was, of course, they were passed. The motion of thanks on these two policy addresses were passed by the Council despite the division in the Council and the need for, a split voting system. But still, for any good relations between the executive and the legislature to be built on the principle of one country, two systems, if there's anyone advocating Hong Kong independence, or if there's any act that endangers national security, the national sovereignty, and the development of the country, and then they join this council, and then they use this platform to sabotage relations between Hong Kong and the central British government, or they even colluded with foreign forces to undermine the one country baseline, then they would undermine the governance of the SAR, and they would endanger national security in the extreme cases. And that's why, while I try to improve the relationship between the executive and the legislature, I have to ensure there are patriots administering Hong Kong. That's why in the past 2 years, the central authorities took decisive action, and with the full support of the Hong Kong SAR. So there was the promulgation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, and we have started a new chapter of good governance for Hong Kong after order has been restored. So against this background, now then in terms of working relations between the executive and legislature, we're able to get things done, we're able to make decisions, and we're able to work with efficiency. I don't see any big problem with that now. Now, we can now see this council has helped to enhance the efficiency of the SL government. We've been seeing that now. Since the 7th term of the Legislative Council has been in office for about half a year, this council has passed many important bills, including introducing non-locally trained doctors from overseas, total ban of e-cigarette, and today the bill to abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement will be passed too. And then they have put forward many views and suggestions to the government, and they've urged the government to integrate into national development as soon as possible, and also to improve people's livelihoods. So there were many members' motions passed without legislative effect on these issues. But even if these motions have no legislative effect, I and my team have been very careful to hear member views and to see how we could implement your, take on board your views. Now, if we do not have patriots administering Hong Kong, there's no way we could have, completed the tasks that I'm going to mention. First, the reorganization of the government structure. Because when I was first elected, I could see that the government structure in place at the time was not the best, but then, because of the political bickering and infighting, there was no room really to table these proposals to this council. But now, with the patriots administering Hong Kong, we are able to proceed with the task, and it will be done. And second point is, if we do not have patriots administering Hong Kong, there is no basis for us to talk about comprehensive cooperation between Hong Kong and Shenzhen about, such as co-location at the Hong Kong cross-boundary point, and then the one zone, two parks, technology parks, and so on. So without this background, there's no way we would have the courage to even introduce the Copyright Amendment Bill, because there were 2 rounds of filibustering and the bills previously introduced could not be passed. And if we don't have this background, there's no way we could have introduced the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy that would cover both Hong Kong and Shenzhen in terms of development. So it's because we have patriots in Hong Kong, so I and my team are able to introduce new ideas, and then we won't be, stopped by any bickering. So with this background, Hong Kong will be able to better leverage on its unique advantage, and we could better integrate into national development. Well, opportunities actually abound. If you look at the National 14th Five-Year Plan, you can see that the central government is doubling its support for Hong Kong. Apart from the traditional industries such as finance, shipping, trade, and so on, under the National 14th Five-Year Plan, the central government is also supporting Hong Kong's development into an international aviation hub, an Asia-Pacific Regional IP Trading Center, international I&T Center, as well as an East-West Cultural Center. So for the development in the past 5 years, what is most encouraging to me and most gratifying to me is the development of innovation and technology and arts and culture. I'm not going to go into details, but with I&T development, it's possible because we have plowed in and unprecedented $150 billion into that. And then for arts and culture, the SL government has been investing in the West Kowloon Cultural District. The M+ Museum was opened to the public last year. It's become very popular with the public, and now we are eagerly looking forward to the opening of the Hong Kong Palace Museum. The museum will be open to the public on the 2nd of July, and I can announce here that the SL government and the Ministry of Culture and Tourism have decided that on the 22nd of June, we will together host a joint opening ceremony of the Hong Kong Palace Museum. I hope you will be able to attend that ceremony. Now, in the past 5 years, we have seen the biggest challenge for the SAR since the unification. The past 5 years were full of turbulence, but I remained undaunted. It is because I have a sense of mission. It is actually a historic mission. Although the public may have different views of me, and among members here, you may think that there's room for improvement with the SL government that I lead, but I can say this to you. I believe I have delivered a report card that I am not ashamed of, and then I believe that it's perfect. A good ending to my 45 years of public service. Here, I wish members will work with great success, and then Hong Kong will be embarking on a new era, and then there will be an even brighter future for one country, two systems. Thank you very much. The Chief Executive will answer questions from members. Members who wish to ask questions, please press the Request to Speak button. I've informed members via the Secretariat that to make best use of the available meeting time such that more members will have the opportunities to put questions to the Chief Executive, 3 minutes will be allowed for asking and answering of each question. The time for asking a question by a member should not exceed 1.5 minutes to allow time for the Chief Executive to give her reply. Questions raised by members should be as concise as possible and should not make arguments when asking questions. Mr. Kenneth Ma. Mr. President, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Carrie Lam for her contribution to Hong Kong in the past 5 years. She successfully implemented the new electoral system to implement the Patriots Administering Hong Kong principle, and she has showcased to the rest of the world the unprecedented success of one country, two systems. And I thank Mrs. Lam for heeding the views of Henry Cook, for taking forward a number of development plans in the new territories, including the Northern Metropolis legislative amendment exercises and acquisition of Chow Town land and opening up of 3 FCAs to remove obstacles for the development in NT so as to unleash potential for land development and also to integrate into our country and make contribution to the development of the new territories. My question for Mrs. Lam is this. What is your take on the challenges and the difficulties in taking forward anti-development, and what is your advice for the next term of government? Chief Executive, I thank Mr. Lau for his questions. I can't help but recall the late Mr. Lau Fad, and he was very well respected, and among the politicians that I am familiar with, he was one of the very best politicians. So to answer Mr. Lau's question, we should all learn from the late Mr. Lau, and that we should try to solve problems together, and that means collaboration between the government and the community. And we need to have patience in listening to views. I remember back then we put forward the proposal to establish the Liantang Hangimai BCP, and that meant decanting Chukyin village residents. So if we only implement this policy strictly according to the book, we do not need to consider the decanting of villages, and the problem will not be resolved. So with the help of the late Mr. Lau, who accompanied me to visit Chukyin villages many times, and in the end, Mr. Lau also helped by exercising his clout over the matter. So in terms of rural affairs in the new territories, we need to have negotiations and try to solve problems together. But of course, there are always facilitators who can help address the problems quicker. And I hope that in the future, more people will be willing to play this role. Mr. Vincent Chen. Good morning, Chief Executive. On the issue of land and housing, I understand that the government has been making a lot of effort, and on behalf of the grassroots living in subdivided units, I'd like to express our appreciation. You have heard our views, including tenancy control on subdivided units, transitional housing, 20,000 units, and also cash allowance, and also Operation Building Bright and other initiatives. You have helped these grassroots living in these undesirable living conditions. But still, many SDU tenants are still in dire straits. In the short term, we believe transitional housing is the answer. Now, in fact, we just visited the United Corp in Kong Hawaii, and we have been able to say that these two projects are very good. Is it possible to have more transitional housing projects? Because over 10,000 plus units won't come on stream until next year or 2024. Is it possible to speed things up so that you can further implement this good policy? Well, thank you, Member, for his concern on transitional housing. My answer is in the affirmative. I believe my colleagues under the land and housing portfolio would also like to speed things up as much as possible. But there are practical difficulties in taking forward these projects. It's not just a matter of red tape or procedural problems. The current term of government made this bold move and floated the Transitional Housing Initiative. It has now become an important rung on this housing ladder. And we have undertaken to provide 25,000 transitional housing units, and so far we have identified land for over 10,000 TH units. So for the next term of government, I would advise them to work even harder. And my appeal to land developers is for them to continue to support this meaningful initiative. But on the issue of land and housing, I'd like to share this with you. Now, land and housing is something that doesn't come to fruition overnight. Very often we sow the seeds, and it's for our successors to reap the crop. So I often advise my colleagues that we need to sustain our effort and that our land and housing policy must not be influenced by short-term property market fluctuations. In terms of land and housing supply in the current term government, the supply has gone up by 40% comparing to the previous term, and I believe firmly that in the coming 10 years, the number will continue to go up substantially. But it is time for us to take forward what we need to do. Mr. Peter Siu, Mr. Tommy Zhang said that he's afraid he won't be able to have a chance to speak, so on his behalf I must also thank you and express our gratitude. Now, we have had some controversial issues passed in this term, including a ban on electronic cigarettes and abolition of the MPF offsetting arrangements, and definitely some people may be saddened by the passage of these bills, and in the moment when the offsetting arrangement bill is passed, Ms. Alice Mack may come forward and give you a peck on the cheek. Now, we have a number of challenges. At the moment, we are still facing the COVID-19 epidemic, and the situation is now stable, and the Chief Executive has also experienced the Black Cat violence in 2019, and well, you were able to roll out initiatives to keep jobs, and I'd like to thank you as well. In fact, we now understand the Hong Kong SAR government has made a lot of effort. Despite all these challenges, the SAR government has been able to make a lot of efforts. Now, we see populism everywhere in the world, and for those representing the labor sector, it seems that they're getting popular and their voices are getting louder. Now, do you have any advice for us representing the business sector? Chief Executive. Indeed, this government has implemented a lot of labor-related initiatives, and I hope that the labor sector would acknowledge the efforts made by the Secretary for Labor and Welfare. As far as the business sector is concerned, I think the most important thing is, like the Financial Secretary said, make a bigger pie. And as long as we're able to do that, I'm sure that the business sector will face a very favorable outlook. But in creating a bigger pie, I need to say, with some soul searching, that there should be good relationship between employers and employees. Now, last night I was watching TV, and there was an interview, and one of the employers said that with the offsetting mechanism abolished, that he would sack long-serving employees and instead hire short-term employees and even casual workers. This would hardly help us achieve success. So I hope the business sector would also take a longer-term perspective and support the government's initiative in this regard so that we can all create wealth for sharing among everyone in Hong Kong. That's all. Ms. Judy Chen, thank you, President, thank you, Chief Executive. In revitalizing central market, the Chief Executive attended the function there. I was there too. She said that in the past few years, she sweated and cried on conservation work in the past few years. I don't think anyone would ever doubt the Chief Executive's enthusiasm in conservation effort, and I would like to express my gratitude for that. Now, of course, it's not just about throwing money at conservation. I hope the Chief Executive will keep to this enthusiasm, and within her term, please take one small step forward to save the Jumbo floating restaurant. Now, many felt a great pity that when the news came out that this restaurant was to be moved out of Hong Kong, but then in the past 10 days or so, there were many white knights who came up with various rescue options to try to save this floating restaurant that carries great memories for many people in Hong Kong. It's also full of significance and unique features for Hong Kong. So this is not something we can buy just with money. So would the government consider helping to keep the jumbo floating restaurant around for some more time, so maybe there will be new opportunities, and maybe you could also consider using innovative technology so that you could preserve the restaurants, both the inside and the outside of it, so we could, say this heritage. Chief Executive. Now, I could appreciate that Mr. D10 is very much concerned about this item because she was once a Southern District Councillor. But we must appreciate this. The floating restaurant is privately owned. In the past 5 years or so, I've worked hard to conserve heritage and historical monuments, but at the same time we have great respect for private properties because these are protected by the basic law. It is also an important element for Hong Kong as a business center. So for the most important thing really is the owner of this private property and how he looks at the issue. Now in the Invigorating Island South project that I proposed at the time, it was our understanding that it was not for the government to spend money to take over the project or to include it as in the revitalizing historic buildings through partnership scheme, but rather we left it to Ocean Park to discuss the matter with the owner. But of course, in the discussion, they were not able to come up with a suitable way out, and we can't really force anything on anybody. And that's my position. But of course, we are now in the last few weeks of this government. If the new government has any views, I would not, disagree in any way. But I would just like to tell members the Invigorating Island South project has been going very well. And this item is just a small element in the whole project. More importantly, we're talking about placemaking and how we could turn the Southern District, in particular, Wong Chuk Hang or urban areas, and make sure they could be all linked up, and then we could have multiple uses for this whole area, and so there would be a better work and living environment for the residents of the Southern District. Mr. Portier, to the President, I would like to thank the Chief Executive for serving Hong Kong in the past 42 years, and for your dedication. Now, in one of the exchange sessions earlier with members, there's mention of workshop on moving amendments, and then I once moved an amendment saying that we should ask the SA government to review its the governance in the past 35 years. So for some reason, the motion cannot get on the agenda. Anyway, we all have to learn from the past, and then there's also saying that when an official has no other aspirations, the official could be really bold. So can you share your experience with us in that respect? Chief Executive. Many thought that in today's opening address I will be talking about my achievements, but there's no point for me to talk about my own achievements. That's why I do not plan to respond to Mr. Paul's question in specific details. If you ask if there's room for improvement, there is always room for improvement. If you look at my last Paul's address delivered last October, there's a chapter on enhancing governance. And I have told you about my own experience and how I identified room for improvement. First is the reorganization of the government structure. If we attach great importance to art and culture, then we must elevate the status of such policies. And if the next government believes our economic development is linked to industry, industrialization, then the name of industry must appear in the name of the policy bureau. And if we think young people are important, then we need a Home and Youth Affairs Bureau to deal with such matters. So the first element for us to do well is first to have the right structure. And I'm grateful to members for speedily agreeing to this structure, and tomorrow at the Finance Committee the relevant funding proposals will be passed. And second point is we need more aspiring individuals to join the governing team, because the temperatures come down substantially in the hot kitchen, as I said earlier. I hope, therefore, when the new chief executive-elect forms his team, we'll be able to enlist more who are capable and who are dedicated. And third thing is, there is this many complain about the silo effect among departments, and departments passing the buck to each other. So that's why my design is to have more dedicated units so they can't really share their responsibility. For example, say the Children's Commission, as soon as they learn about the children's residential home incident, the Commission should be the first to come out to condemn the incident and follow up. And fourthly, we need to have proper explanation, publicity, and promotion, especially when we have good policies. Otherwise, these won't work very well. So public relations is important. I have already summed up my experience on that last year. Now, some suspected that I did make my decision long ago not to run for election, but if you have been observing what I've been saying and doing in the past year, you know I have planned to leave, even in the policy address, and particularly in the policy address supplement. I've already given an account on all the work we've done in the past 4 to 5 years. Mr. So Chen-Wing. Thank you, President. Good morning, Mrs. Lam. Now, your 5-year term must be the toughest and the most challenging of all chief executive terms. On the 11th of April 2017, President Xi Jinping said this about you, that you love the country, you love Hong Kong, you have a firm position, you are diligent, you have the abilities to prevail over challenges, you are committed to the country and Hong Kong. So, I believe, from your performance, President has been on the spot with his observation of you. And then because of your commitment, you have helped Hong Kong sail through the various crises, and you've started a new chapter of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is definitely grateful to you for that. Now, there were unprecedented incidents, and so this must be a great experience, and it would be an asset for Hong Kong. So to the new government, what will you advise, especially if the new government faces a major public crisis? That's my first question. Second question, would you continue to serve the country and Hong Kong affairs so you could continue to make good use of your talents? Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. So. Now, when I'm not in a certain position, I will not, interfere with others doing their work. So that's why for the next term of government, I am not going to, offer my advice. But what I'm going to do today is, together with the Secretary for the Civil Service, I will be attending the ceremony to start the construction of the new Civil Service College. As Mr. So pointed out, I've been in public service for over 40 years, almost every post. So that's why I'll be happy to share my experience with my colleagues at the Civil Service College. That is something I'll be glad to do. And then we have this great honor of Hong Kong Palace Museum. In 2016, when I tried to ask the central authorities to let us build this palace museum, at that time I made a promise that it will leverage on our unique advantage to tell a good story of China and a good story of Chinese culture. So after I leave my post, I'll be very happy to get involved in this aspect of work. Okay. Mr. Martinelli, this year marks the 25th year of the establishment of Hong Kong SAR and the unification to our motherland. and under your leadership, we are now at the mid-start of the promise of 50 years unchanged for Hong Kong, and according to President Xi Jinping, whilst maintaining stability, we need to explore opportunities, and we need to ride out the storms and face challenges. Now, in terms of adequately implementing one country, two systems principle, what are your feelings and what is your advice, and how should we explore the future development of Hong Kong? Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Liao, for this very broad topic. This year marks the 25th year of reunification of Hong Kong SAR to our motherland. This is the mid-stop, and some say that we are about to start the second half of the game. Well, actually, I don't agree. In the conclusion of last year's policy address, I already stated that I do not agree, because we have been incorporated into the new system, and we are now getting back on the right track of one country, two systems. With such good governance, there is no need to change. And in fact, recently, as the central authorities also sent a similar message, and that there is no need to change. And of course, if we encounter new problems, we can always make improvements. Now, what can I conclude from my experience? In the past few years, I encountered a lot of difficulties, and I would always refer to this book. That is the important remarks delivered by President Xi Jinping on the 1st of July 2017, when this term of government assumed office. Now, you just quoted from the remarks that we are entering a new era, and we would be facing some new challenges. So if we abide by the four principles, we would sail through smoothly. First, we need to grasp accurately the relationship between our country and Hong Kong SAR. That is, we need to have one country before we have two systems. And I believe after what happened in recent years, we have built a good and solid foundation. Second principle, we need to abide by the basic law. So within my term of office, I would say that I have made the most proposals to the central authorities for interpretation. And I believe that under this mechanism we'll be able to set sail smooth, steady and far. But the third principle is the most important, and that we should focus on long-term development, and we have Northern Metropolis Development Strategy, Land Out, Tomorrow Vision, and also the arts and cultural development. And the fourth imperative is that we need to put people first. We need to instill in them a sense of happiness, and that is why on the issue of livelihood-related matters such as poverty, we'll
following. In the past 5 years, when Hong Kong experienced a lot of turbulences, would you think that you would be able to give play to your potential better had you been the chief executives in the previous terms, or after the electoral system has been improved, or that had you known about the turmoil, you would not have agreed to become chief executive? And what is your drive for overcoming these difficult times? To answer you at the outset, my answer is in the negative. There has never been any moment of my regretting having taken up this appointment in the past 5 years. To answer Mr. Look's question, again, I need to turn to last year's policy address. In fact, the last year's policy address contains everything you are seeking answers to. Now, the first point is that we have the central authorities' support. Last year, I used a specific term, and that the Central People's Government would always staunchly support the Hong Kong SAR and the Hong Kong SAR government. And this unwavering support forms a very solid basis for us. Second, I took the oath when I assumed office, and in my speech, I said that I would always walk with Hong Kong people. So there's no way for me to turn back. Third, I had the support of my family, and that is why in the past 5 years, I have been able to face and overcome these challenges. The other point is perhaps my personality. Somebody actually comments that I would get all excited when I face challenges because I have the urge to overcome these challenges. So, in hindsight, I would say that these are the elements that have supported me through.
Mr. Robert Lee. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, first of all, I'd like to thank you and your team for your hard work and dedication. Obviously, the post of Chief Executive is highly challenging. In the past few years, Hong Kong has been through the black-clad violence and the pandemic, and we have seen this chaos, but now order has been restored. So looking ahead, because of the complex geopolitical situation, and there is still no normal resumption of normal cross-boundary travel, so many business activities could not take place. Now, for SMEs that are rooted in Hong Kong, how could they still have room for survival given the complex international situation? For SMEs, of course, they have to work hard and move with the times, but what role can they play? And then in the course of development, how could there be a better balance between development and regulation? Chief Executive, thank you for the question. Well, in the past 5 years, every policy we made would, have a special angle for SMEs. So we will try to consider the position and see how we could provide them with more opportunities and support. I'm not going to go into details today, but as Mr. Lee pointed out, there are there's complex political situation around the world, and there is also fierce competition. In the near term, of course, we have to strive for resumption of cross-boundary travel, either quarantine-free travel, and also we need to re-establish links with overseas places. And immediately also, we need to enhance Hong Kong's international position and competitiveness, because, with what happened in the past 3 years, and there are foreign forces or foreign media that have reported on Hong Kong in an inaccurate manner, because we have not been able to conduct overseas visits, so we've not been able to do explanation or in person. If we want SMEs to have better business environment, is all about expanding the market. And or gaining access to different markets, and by that we need to keep up links with other countries, and we need to sign trade agreements and so on. So with the hard work of Mr. Edward Yao, much has been done on bilateral trade agreements and other agreements. Now, for 3 trade agreements, so far we have 8, and 4 were signed within this term of the government. And also, there are various agreements on investment promotion. So such effort certainly would help to provide a good environment for SMEs for the future development. Mr. Jimmy, thank you, President. Well, you have made many good policies during your term. One policy that's been welcomed by the business sector is about, relaunching is the reindustrialization policy. And many owners of industrial buildings took part in the scheme to revitalize industrial buildings. Now they have additional resources to revitalize industrial buildings, and many stood to gain from this effort. But of course, no scheme is perfect. So with the scheme on revitalizing industrial buildings, actually you could do more. With change of government imminent, can I ask you this, Chief Executive? Now, when it comes to revitalizing industrial buildings, is there something that you would have liked to do, but you could not get it done? Would you, share this view with the next government for their reference? Chief Executive, on revitalizing industrial buildings, I must thank President Andrew Leung and Mr. Carrie Lam. When I was the Secretary for Development in 2008, the 3 of us, talked about this issue, and we came up with this idea because you were industrialists. You could see that industrial buildings were not put to good use because the industry, manufacturing sectors moved northwards. So that's why we have reindustrialization 1.0 and 2.0, and every time we try to see whether there are additional incentives for owners of industrial buildings to redevelop their buildings or to revitalize their buildings. Initially, we offered land premium waivers, and later on, the focus was on redevelopment of industrial buildings, so we allowed additional plot ratio. Now, there's one thing lacking here, and I've raised this in my policy address, and I've asked the Secretary for Development to follow up on that. It's about multiple ownership. This is something we need to address. So because for buildings with a single owner, there's been redevelopment already, and so that's why we have raised the threshold of gaining control of 80% of the shares. Ownership shares. And so the Secretary for Development is considering how we could further amend the legislation so that we could group together property rights, and then it will be conducive to our taking forward our revitalization policy. Of course, if you have any suggestions, please do let us know. Because for this whole exercise of revitalizing industrial buildings we learned from talking to people because we didn't have the experience ourselves. So every time it was owners of industrial buildings that put forward suggestions that we thought they were feasible, then we passed them at Exco, and then it became a policy. Thank you. Mr. Horace Zhang. Thank you. Good morning, Chief Executive. In the past 5 years, unfortunately, this government faced serious man-made disasters and also the pandemic. So the government faced unprecedented challenges, and we could not even start to imagine the difficulties the Chief Executive faced. Actually, if we take an objective look, this government has delivered on many fronts. For example, Mr. Michael Look mentioned improving labor rights, such as increasing the number of paternity leave days, increasing occupational safety and health penalties, and all. Today, we're probably going to pass the bill to abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement. So these are all good examples. And then there is a tenancy control banning of e-cigarettes, the development of the West Kowloon Cultural District, and also the Northern Metropolis development. All these projects are very important for the development of Hong Kong. But then there is still an issue in the community where there's much consensus, that is the reform of the civil service. Now, you've worked in the government for several decades. You are totally conversant with the civil service system. So can you share with us your views on civil service reform here? Chief Executive. Now, some in the community have said that there's room for improvement with the civil service system that's been in place for decades. In fact, soon after the reunification, there was a major review. I remember that cover of that consultation paper was in yellow. But then there was much objection, that's some mention of the revolving door system and so on. Anyway. If you talk about problems with the civil service, if I may quote Director Xia Baolong, he said that those in the civil service must be prepared to work and are able to do their work and get things done. My own experience that most civil servants have been able to deliver, so they want to get things done. They do get things done. But then today, it's not just about doing what is before them, but at the same time they need to think out of the box. They need to help the people resolve their livelihood issues. So people need to be motivated to get things done. There is a lack of this motivation in some cases. What's the reason for that? Some said it's because of political issue, but then we have a better environment now because we have patriots administering Hong Kong. And some say that even if people work hard, maybe their performance is also reflected in the appraisal system. So these are issues that the government need to explore. Thank you.
Mr. Chan Kin Paul. Good morning, Chief Executive. In your term of office, because of changes in the global landscape and the COVID-19 pandemic, Hong Kong has experienced the hardest time since the reunification. And with the dedicated of the Chief Executive, I support the reclamation near Khao Yi Chau, and I'm happy to learn that in the end of 2020, the Finance Committee approved funding for the project. However, members of the public do not understand why a study would take 2 or 3 years so that the reclamation project won't be completed in 10 years. If we're able to compress the timetable, we'll definitely improve housing supply. Now, you were Secretary for Development in the past. Can you share with us some insight and and what reform should be introduced? First of all, I thank Mr. Chan Kin Paul for being chairman of the Finance Committee for many years, and during the times when there was political bickering, and also during peaceful times, he's helped us secure funding for public works projects. Now, for the early part of the Lantau Tomorrow Vision, that is a Khao Yi Chau reclamation project, we spent months applying for funding. I hope this will not happen again. Well, the study takes about 30 months because it is not just an ordinary feasibility study. As I understand, this is a very specific study on, say, road and railway alignments. So we have the planning aspect and the works aspects of the study, and the EIA procedures are also involved. But anyway, in terms of streamlining procedures, compressing the timetable, apart from taking administrative means, we can also take forward the legislative amendments, and in fact is on the agenda. The Secretary for Development has prepared a proposal and submitted that to the Council. With members' consent, we can take this forward as well. But let me just also say that when sometimes we feel that these procedures are rigid, they are bureaucratic, and the red tape is getting in the way of development. We still need safeguards because of due process. Without these safeguards, it's dangerous, as the government can do whatever it wants. So we need to find the middle of the road approach, and I do believe that we can compress certain procedures, and we can have certain procedures going in parallel. Anyway, the Secretary for Development has come up with a plan for consideration by this Council. Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. Lam, Chief Executive, first of all, I thank you for your contribution to Hong Kong in the past 5 years. As the first female Chief Executive in the Hong Kong SAR, you set a good example for all women. In Chapter 6 of your policy address, in terms of caring for society and improving people's livelihood, you say that this term of government will implement and formulate policies on elderly care and helping the underprivileged. And in particular, you are going to deploy more resources to tackle the issue of aging population and to help elders age in place. However, during the epidemic, the death rate for patients above 70 reached 12%. And in the fifth wave of the epidemic, we had elderly residents in residential care homes and those sent to the Asia World Expo isolation facilities, really in dire straits. And what is your feeling in this regard about our elderly in Hong Kong? Do you think that you are creating a favorable living environment for them? Chief Executive. Well, I was Director of Social Welfare for 3 years, so I do have knowledge on helping the underprivileged, and I am dedicated. So for the current term of government, if you gauge its work only by one indicator, I would say that we have made achievement, and that is welfare spending. In the past 5 years, the recurrent spending increased by 60 to 70%, and that is really hard to come by. In fact, welfare spending has exceeded the spendings on education and healthcare. Now, with an aging population in Hong Kong, I would say that we continue to face this daunting challenge. So I believe we need to work hard to formulate a blueprint for healthcare and community care for the elderly. Now, we learned the somber lesson in the fifth wave, and there is so much more to be desired in terms of residential care for the elderly. So I hope that in the next term of government, when we have the splitting of the current bureau into the Health Bureau, it will take the lead to explore how elderly people can receive adequate care outside of the hospital system. Otherwise, just like the COVID-19 pandemic, once they are confirmed, they would be all sent to hospitals, leading to the tragic scene that we didn't want to witness. Well, this challenge can be overcome, and definitely there is room for improvement. Mr. Holden Chow, Chief Executive. First of all, I thank you for your contribution to Hong Kong as a Chief Executive. I'd also like to speak on behalf of grassroots, and I think this government has done a lot for the anti-epidemic fund. There is subsidy for cleaning workers and security guards, and you agreed to take this forward, and every month they receive a $2,000 subsidy. You later continued to plug the gaps, and you expanded the scheme to cover cleaning workers and security guards in hospital authority and schools. And also for I'd like to thank the Property Service Management Authority for helping in this regard as well. But I understand that there are employers who are reluctant to apply for this subsidy for their cleaners and security guards, despite the incentive. Chief Executive, can we draw on the reference of the cleaning workers and security guards for 3 new buildings, because these employees can apply themselves. And if you can take this approach, for those who are not yet eligible, they can now apply as well and give them some help, especially in face of the current inflation rate. They are in dire straits. Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Chow. Providing anti-epidemic subsidy to frontline cleaners and security workers, security guards. I mean, the spirit of this scheme is that we welcome applications in general, and we don't have a very strict eligibility criteria. That depends on the employers, rather, because we want to acknowledge the contribution of frontline cleaners and security guards in fighting the epidemic. And indeed, after introducing the subsidy scheme, we then identified some gaps to be filled, and we're not missing anyone out. And I will invite the bureau chief to examine the subsidy scheme again. We are not going to be a miser. We will make sure that subsidies are delivered as quickly as possible. Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. In the COVID-19 pandemic, we had the 5th wave was actually caused by an air crew who returned by cargo flight despite the departing Hong Kong in a passenger flight. And I took the government to task, and that the person should be, or the airline company should be held accountable. And I received a reply from the government. But in terms of the airline company's responsibility, there is a void here. And every day we have 500 new cases. And in particular, for the bar clusters, 8 customers have not complied with the compulsory testing notice to get tested. And these customers continue to be at large, causing transmission risk. That means a great loophole in the government's anti-epidemic work. The Leave Home Safe app should be updated to control the movements of those under the CTNs. And my suggestion is to turn the persons subject to CTNs vaccine passcode QR code to red, and only when they get tested would the code become yellow, and if the result is negative, it will turn blue again. By doing so, we can prevent those subject to CTNs from entering high-risk premises. Chief Executive, would you direct the relevant policy bureau to look into this suggestion? Chief Executive. Of course, I would invite the Secretary for Innovation Technology to examine this issue. Mr. Lai also comes from a civil service background, so I think you are in a better position to understand that in our daily line of work, there are many factors to consider. And there is not a single system that is watertight. Relying all on the government's efforts, be it illicit cigarettes, overstayers, even counter-terrorism work, we need the community's cooperation. And that is even more the case for fighting the epidemic. If members of the public don't wear a mask and don't get vaccinated and don't use a Leave Home Safe app, of course, law enforcement is an option, but it is not watertight. We cannot prevent offenses or we cannot prevent people from breaking the law. And we need to consider whether there are better means for those subject to CTNs to get tested and those unjabbed to get vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Mr. Chen Yong, thank you, President. I'm very much grateful to the Chief Executive, Mrs. Lam, for your hard work. I'm sure we all agree that you are among the top 3 most diligent leaders. Now, for one country, 2 systems to work successfully, we have relied on the hard work of the previous Chief Executives, including Mr. Tung Chee-hwa, Mr. C.Y. Leung, and so on. Now, and in Hong Kong, we are trying to strive for true democracy. We want not the kind of democracy advocated by the U.S. president, which is more a boxing fight. Now, with people's livelihood issues, do you think that we've built good foundation for some of these issues? Can you name one or two? And then in the near future, we'll be able to take such work further, and then the people of Hong Kong will have hope for a better future. Chief Executive, well, livelihood issues cover many aspects, education, healthcare, welfare, and so on. And in every policy, as Mr. Chen pointed out, it's not just the work of one single term of government. It's rather previous governments have built the foundation, and so it's like constructing a building, and then on top of the foundation we could build something. So that's what this government has been doing too. And of course, relatively speaking, we have addressed some of the long-standing and tough issues. We have not tried to push them back. And so in any way, in the coming months and years, there's much more we need to do in greater depth. Now, for example, with education, for this government, we've only put things back on the right track. So we have removed things that should not be there. But then when it comes to quality education, there are still many elements to consider. I'm sure every parent would believe that there's room for improvement in our education system. For example, we want to encourage young children to have an interest in learning about technology, and there has to be diversified development for our children. So with education, I believe we could do a lot more now that we are back on the right track. Because talent will be one of the biggest challenges Hong Kong faces. And with talent nurturing, we have to start with the nurturing of local talent. In the near to medium term, we could attract talents from overseas. We've been rather successful in that respect. But in the long run, it's about training our own talents. So with education, we need to do more. Thank you. Mr. Michael Lee. Honorable Chief Executive, like many members of this council and members of the Liberal Party, we would like to thank you for having done so much for Hong Kong in the past 5 years. Now, from the Hospital Authority website, we see that the longest waiting time for specialist outpatient clinic is eye specialty, ear, throat, nose, throat, and so on. And for new patients, you have to wait some 100 weeks, almost 2 years, to get an appointment. And then yesterday, the government announced the list of doctors with their overseas qualifications, the list of institutes with their qualifications recognized. The first on the, and many have commended the effort and they support the list. The first institute on the list is from the mainland, and so we would like to thank you for this good policy, and we hope to be able to see results soon. Anyway, can you share your experience of the next government so that the Medical Council would not use various reasons to cancel the qualifications examination, so non-local doctors could come to Hong Kong soon and relieve the pressure on the public healthcare system? Chief Executive, I would like to thank members for supporting the bill to bring in overseas doctors. Well, that bill is just the first step. We're just opening the door a bit. There's still much to do. That's why we've set up a special committee chaired by Professor Tang Wei King. And, they've been working very hard. So in a short space of a few months, they've already published 2 lists. And I'm sure the committee will continue to work very hard. But then when it comes to gatekeeping, it's still the Medical Council. So I must appeal to the Medical Council to put the people's interest first. So in our effort to introduce non-locally trained doctors, I hope they will help to remove the regulatory constraints. And also they will put the overall interest of Hong Kong first. Now, I asked about the cancellation of the clinical tests. but they didn't do it deliberately, I understand. It's just because of the epidemic, so they deferred the clinical test. And then when the epidemic eased, they wanted to relaunch the test, but there's much to do to make the preparation. I'm sure the future Secretary for Health will have regard to the bill passed by this council, as well as the spirit of the bill, to make sure the medical council speed up its work. Mr. Leung Yok Wai. Now, thank you, President. I would like to thank you for proposing to reorganize the Home Affairs Bureau into the Home and Youth Affairs Bureau. This is to highlight the importance of youth policies. And this will, of course, allow us to focus more on youth work. Now, with youth work, the most important aspect is about training talents for Hong Kong. And talents would be a key to the development of Hong Kong in future. But then there was turbulence in the community, and also because of the epidemic, people would not want to come to Hong Kong to work. The business sector has been telling us that we have lost out on many professional talents. And of course, we have also a low birth rate in Hong Kong. So under the National 14th Five-Year Plan, Hong Kong is to continue to develop our 4 traditional centers and 3 new centers. So would there be any other conditions that we could put in place to bring in more talents from outside of Hong Kong, so that we could face our challenge while at the same time we train our local talents? Mr. Leung, thank you for your question. Before you joined this council, you've been very much concerned about youth work. Now, since early April, I doubled down as the Chief Secretary for Administration, so that's why not long ago I chaired some meetings that were supposed to be chaired by the Chief Secretary. One of that was the Youth Development Commission. And I'm very glad to see the commitment and the work done by the Youth Development Commission. In particular, for the member self-recommendation scheme for youth, we've seen great success and many young people have joined our various committees. So I hope the next government will continue with this work. Bringing in talents is a very important issue, and is also a pressing issue. We have various schemes to attract overseas talents and mainland talents. And now, when the epidemic eases, when normal travel resumes, I believe Hong Kong will remain an appealing place. Now, why do I say that? It's because last year we introduced the global STEM professorship scheme. We bring in top-level talents, and the response was better than expected. And we managed to recruit some really high-caliber talents. And some were concerned that after 2019, people may have a negative perception of Hong Kong. They will resent coming to Hong Kong to study or to work. But that's not the case. The latest admission figures show that the 8 tertiary institutes in Hong Kong are still able to recruit to enroll students of high caliber from the mainland, students who could have otherwise gone to Tsinghua University, for instance. And so, and then with the mainland talents admission scheme, we have seen the figures go up to the normal level. So that I'm glad to hear the CE-elect say that talents is a top priority for Hong Kong, and I'm sure he will address that issue.
Mr. Yim Kong. Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Chief Executive, looking back from the anti-extradition movement to the COVID pandemic, this government has experienced a lot of difficulties, and with the central authorities' support, the SAR government has safeguarded national security and the security of Hong Kong, as well as making contribution to fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to acknowledge the effort. Mr. Wang Guangshi in Song Dynasty had this saying in his poem, and as head of the chief executive, you don't buckle under pressure, and it is a very difficult task for you. And we thank the Chief Executive for expressing concern for Chinese enterprises in Hong Kong. So I'd like to know the role of these enterprises in the future development of Hong Kong, and what is your expectation? Chief Executive, in the past decade or so, I would say that among public officials, I had the frequent exchanges with the mainland enterprises, and in terms of mainland enterprises in Hong Kong, we put forward our requests and express our expectations. They take up quite a large share in Hong Kong at the moment in terms of companies listed and also the jobs created. They take up quite a larger share. And of course, I would hope that the Chamber of Commerce could take a greater part in public affairs. And I'm happy to see that under the improved electoral system, we have the commercial sector for them to make contribution as well. And in terms of arts and culture and sports, in recent years, they've also provided a lot of sponsorship. And many mainland enterprises have also formed voluntary teams, and they helped conduct home visits and help the community in fighting the epidemic in particular. So in terms of their full participation into the affairs of Hong Kong in the past decade, I express gratitude, and I will be happy to see the participation of mainland enterprises on different occasions in the future. Dr. Wendy Hong. I thank the Chief Executive for serving Hong Kong in her different capacities in the past decades in the public service, but I'd like to supplement that you did not introduce a lockdown during the most serious times of the epidemic, and I am disappointed. And we are facing an unprecedented change, and there are also changes in the global political and economic landscape. Hong Kong also faces a lot of deep-seated conflicts. We need to take a strategic and forward-looking approach. We need to have a visionary positioning to tackle the different challenges globally and to share the wealth with Hong Kong people. The previous Chief Executive positioned Hong Kong as a superconnector. Now, Chief Executive, what is your view on the strategic positioning of Hong Kong so that we can cope with future developments? Chief Executive, I thank member for the questions. Hong Kong enjoys advantages geographically, and we also have good connections with the mainland. And that is why for many years we have been the so-called connector or the gateway or the springboard for the mainland, and it is a very important role. However, I don't think Hong Kong should remain just as a connector. On the contrary, we should continue to add value to our own city and our people and to make greater contribution to the mainland. Whenever central authorities mention the advantages of Hong Kong, they always say that Hong Kong is the most internationalized city of the mainland, which is highly marketized and and internationalized, and that is why we should maximize or give play to these three advantages. In fact, under the leadership of the Secretary for Justice, in recent years, we have enhanced the rule of law whilst liaising with external parties. If you take a look at her Facebook, you will see how we are promoting arbitration and legal and dispute resolution services to the rest of the world. And Premier Li Keqiang actually announced the participation of Hong Kong into ALCO, the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization. The second point is marketization. Mr. Peter Shiu talked about populism emerging, and that we must continue to be highly marketized and to provide a favorable business environment in Hong Kong. The third point is internationalization or globalization. In the past 2 years, because of travel restrictions, I would say that this definitely had an impact, and somehow that ate into our competitiveness. So we need to enhance our international status through duty visits, through bilateral or multilateral trade agreements, or through different initiatives in different areas. We need to attract international talents or talents from around the world in terms of arts, culture, and sports, etc. Mrs. Regina Ip, the Honorable Chief Executive, it's been 25 years since reunification with our country, and I believe among the 4 chief executives, you have been the one with the toughest situation. You faced social unrest in 2019, and you also faced the epidemic situation that has gone on for 3 years, and you're facing a lot of pressure, undoubtedly, and I have deep respect for you. Now, in terms of the epidemic, many are concerned that the 6th wave may be hitting us, and the public's concern against this backdrop is, of course, reopening our boundary. Now, for the next chief executive, should there be a 6th wave of the epidemic and quarantine-free travel, what is your advice for him? Chief Executive, thank you, Mrs. Ip, for showing concern about the present epidemic situation. On Tuesday, I had a meeting with my experts to gauge the latest epidemic situation. The majority of experts weren't very concerned because, despite the high transmissibility of Omicron strain, the symptoms of confirmed cases are mild, together with the quite a good vaccination rate in Hong Kong. We already have a protection shield. However, vaccination can reduce deaths and serious cases. It doesn't mean we can eliminate infections once and for all. With this shield, we can prevent hospital admission. We can prevent serious cases and deaths. So we will be successfully tackling the first challenge, that is to safeguard our healthcare system. As of last night, only 370 patients were admitted in hospital because of COVID-19, and only 17 of them were in critical or serious condition, and only 4 were receiving intensive care treatment. So indeed, if you look at the figures, we previously had 200, 300 cases. Now we have 500, 600 cases a day. But according to experts, there is no need to implement immediate responsive measures such as tightening the social distancing measures. But at the same time, experts have called on us to boost the vaccination rate, because only by doing so will Hong Kong be able to tide over the inevitable transmission of this strain. And I believe the next term of government will work on this basis. Now, quarantine-free travel with the mainland remains a huge challenge. It's clear by now that many countries around the world have adopted one philosophy in fighting the epidemic, and our country adopts another philosophy, and we are sort of in the middle, and that is why we need to be careful in assessing the situation and considering what measures to be adopted so that we can have a win-win. But this is really treading on a fine line, and I can tell you, in the short term, I don't see it's possible if we follow the thread of discussion we had at the end of last year. But with the new government assuming office, I am not in a position to comment whether they'll be able to adjust the policy.
Well, there are 4 members waiting to speak. I wonder if the chief executive could stay on a little longer, so for members still on the waiting list would have a chance to ask questions. Chief executive, fine, thank you. Mr. Frankie Yik. Chief Executive, I'm sure you know that the transportation and logistics sector covers many different industries. In the past few years, some of them were unhappy that the government was unable to take care of their interests. But today, I want to talk about the port and shipping industry. They are very much grateful to what you've done during your term. For example, the tax concessions for shipping leases, other tax concessions for maritime activities, and then next year there will be the bill receiving first reading about ship owners and so on, and their tax concessions, and then the Transport and Housing Bureau will soon start the Smart Port Initiative. So all such developments would certainly form an important foundation for Hong Kong develop into an international shipping hub under the National 14th Five-Year Plan. The next government should really consider setting up port control board with executive powers to manage our ports. And then for Hong Kong to enhance its position as a regional logistics center, I wonder if the chief executive will consider having detailed discussions with the CA-elect, and would you help to convince the CA-elect to consider the suggestion of the sector? Chief Executive, Mr. Yik, as I said earlier on today, I'm not going to offer my views to the CA-elect on what he's to do. I should give him as much room as possible. But then on the positioning of Hong Kong as a maritime center, I think that's clear. If we face tough competition, if we just talk about our turnover as a port, we are not very much competitive. But then when it comes to other maritime services such as resolution, arbitration, and so on, we still have an edge. That's why we have been working very hard in the past few years to enhance our competitiveness in this aspect. Now, do we need a board or a council? Well, I've shared with you my views, but my views don't matter anymore. And then we're going to have the Transport and Logistics Bureau, and because the Bureau won't need to focus on housing matters, so there should be room for this Bureau to do the promotion that you mentioned. For example, they could listen to the views of the sector and set up a new organization. Well, perhaps we should leave it to the next government. I'm sure you will take this up with the next government. You will convey the views of the sector to them. Thank you. Mr. Tommy Cheung. I won't repeat the praises my colleagues heaped on you, and I totally share their praises. But you mentioned the civil servants. You said, well, all you do in future is to share your experience with civil servants. Well, in fact, if they don't mind, they can invite me. I will share my experience with them too. In terms of my interactions with civil servants at this council, I can share my experience. Now, what I'd like to say is, on the abolition of the MPF offsetting arrangement and charging municipal solid waste, I want to give you the position of the Liberal Party. Yes, you've secured enough votes, but still in the process, you have tried very hard to consider views put forward by different political parties and try to take on board their views. That's a good thing. Mr. Frankie Yik chairs the Bills Committee on Municipal Solid Waste Charging. At the time, your instruction was we must improve upon the bill, and that's why the Bureau sat together with us to improve the bill. It's not about us filibustering, so I have to make that very clear. But still, I have to come back to doctors. You said the second batch list of institutes was endorsed, and that includes the Fudan University. Do you know the Fudan University has a number of degree courses, but the only one degree course is allowed, and that degree course is taught in English, and they only take in overseas students, not mainland students. And for Hong Kong people who want to take this course, they have to have foreign passports. So really, you asked me to have trust in the medical council, because in the past, in so many years in the past, the medical council is manipulated by a handful of people, and they will only care about the interests of local doctors, and so I have no faith there. Chief Executive. Well, I think we need to have faith, and things cannot be achieved overnight. For this list of institutes, I have not studied it in detail, but I'm sure the committee must have considered many objective factors. And then we will be seeing more lists of institutes. Now, if like Mr. Chen King-po, we would like to give classes to civil servants and share experience, we welcome that. We don't need to wait till the completion of the civil service college. And such interactions are very beneficial. Why is it that officials are not able to answer questions in this council? If members will tell us there are certain issues with the way you answer questions, and if officials don't have the confidence to answer questions in this council, is no longer it no longer has to be the case, because members are very friendly now. Dr. Loy Kwok. Now, as the Secretary for Development, the Chief Secretary for Administration, or the Chief Executive, Mrs. Lam has cared very much about the views and work of the construction sector, and she supports the work of the construction sector. And of course, very much is very much the case that with many government policies, they could only be implemented with public works projects. And then Chief Executive also cares very much about succession in the sector. That's why you've taken aboard our view. So university students could join a training scheme. You've increased the number of places. And then for private contractors, if they want to hire assistants, there is wage subsidy. So I hope now for engineering students, they are about to graduate this year. There's another batch of graduates. So which I hope the government will make an early announcement to extend the scheme, so that the sector would have the resources needed to train people. But there's another very long-term issue of great interest to the BPA, which is about our population policy and manpower policy. Because the sector is saying that even if there is government subsidy, their concern is that they're not able to hire people. But perhaps, of course, it will be for the next government to continue with the work.
Thank you, Dr. Low, for his dedication to his sector over the years. In terms of the specific projects and suggestions, we'll definitely consider them, because indeed, we spent years training engineering graduates, and we must not allow our effort to go to waste. So this will definitely be supported by the Secretary for Development, and he will follow up on it. On population or on manpower, indeed, it's an important issue in the next term of government. That is why this will come under the Labor and Welfare Bureau. We have the Human Resources Planning Commission chaired by the Chief Secretary for Administration, and I believe this will continue to be the case in the future. When it comes to talents, we're talking about grooming our own talents and attracting overseas talents. And in recent years, we have really been very generous in giving resources to the 8 tertiary institutions to nurture talents. And this is acknowledged by the institutions. Especially, we are seeing more graduates joining the R&D sector. And like I said, attracting overseas talents, Hong Kong remains attractive. Now, in the short term, because of travel restrictions, perhaps we are not fully aware of how attractive Hong Kong is. But in the future, I think we'll focus on attracting overseas talents. Last member to speak, Mr. Duncan Chiu. Thank you for allowing more time, Mr. President. Well, I don't have speaking notes for me. On innovation technology, I'd like to say a few words. I remember when I first had an exchange with you, you were the Chief Secretary for Administration, and I shared with you views of my sector. And after you assumed office, I must say that our sector had their worries. For the I&T sector, they were of the view that you were not familiar with our sector. And after years of turbulences, I thank the Chief Executive for your support for our sector, and you have put in a lot of resources. You have been very committed. But of course, there is more to be desired. Because of the improvements, I have now joined the Council. Now, despite the circumstances, the government has continued to support the I&T sector. So I'd like to thank you, Chief Executive. In the latest policy address, the Northern Metropolis remains a very important strategy for us. I hope that you will continue with this work and provide more resources to support our development. I have only one question. If I ask you to envision the development of I&T in the coming decade, how would you envisage our city to be in terms of technical development? It's true. In the past 5 years, Mr. Alfred Sid, the Secretary for Innovation and Technology, and myself have really made a lot of effort and spent a lot of resources on I&T. Because after years of service, I've come to realize that you either don't do it or you do it boldly with good planning. If you only come up with minor improvements, which is always the members' criticism for us, then we will be lagging behind like we have in terms of I&T, and we've lost a lot of development opportunities. The first Chief Executive, Mr. C.H. Tung, had his philosophy on innovation technology, and Professor Tianqiang Lin also supported these initiatives. And had we proceeded forward with these initiatives, we would have been a premier I&T hub around the world now. But anyway, we continue to catch up, and we will continue to do so. I believe in the coming decade, in terms of innovation technology, we should take a lead in terms of life sciences and biotechnology. And that is why in last year's policy address, I suggest that the third platform should be set up in Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Park, and the platform will focus on biotechnology and life sciences. And the 3 universities in Hong Kong will, in due course, float the proposals in terms of life science, and the SAR government, I'm sure, will continue to give full support to the institutions. The Chief Executive's question and answer session ends. Members, this is the last attendance of the Q&A session within her term as Chief Executive. The Chief Executive attaches importance to the relationship between the Executive and the Legislature. She attended 18 questions and answer session and 18 questions time, and she altogether answered 445 questions from members in these sessions. And the Chief Executive will also honor his promise, and within 30 days, for all the issues to be followed up by different policy bureaus, replies will be submitted to the Legislative Council. And I'd like to thank the Chief Executive for fulfilling her constitutional duty, and the members for fulfilling the constitutional duty in monitoring the government. The Chief Executive will now leave the chamber. Will members please remain standing? The Chief Executive will now leave the chamber. Will members please remain standing? This is the end of the Chief Executive's question and answer session. The Council meeting resumes. Council in committee. We continue to study the Employment and Retirement Schemes Legislation Offsetting Arrangement Amendment Bill 2022.
Members may refer to appendix to the script.